I always had a really hard time focusing when it came to schoolwork. I've had some traumatic experiences in my life, and as a result, it just makes me feel off. I can't focus at all when I'm home. Even when it's quiet, every little thing bothers me, and I feel like I just read the same line a million times. In my sophomore year of college, I started driving to a secluded location and doing all my readings for school. I didn't live far from the country, so it would only take me about 20 minutes to drive to a peaceful location. I found the peace and tranquility of nature to be soothing. I know it may sound crazy to some people that I would drive that far just to do homework, but I really had no choice. It ended up being the only way that I could concentrate on my work. When the end of my senior year was approaching, I started to freak out about one of my big exams. The exam was 40% of my final grade, and I needed at least a 75 on the exam to pass the course. I decided that I was going to spend the weekend before the exam studying, and that I was going to make my own little adventure out of the experience. Instead of going to my usual spot, I was going to travel to an area a few hours away, hike the beautiful trails, and find a nice quiet spot to study. I left first thing Saturday morning and arrived at my destination at around 10 in the morning. I spent the early part of the day hiking until roughly 2 in the afternoon. I found this amazing spot near the top of a steep hill. It was a clearing that overlooked a bunch of trees. There were some rocks on top of the hill, and I was able to get comfortable with my books and computer. I started reading my textbook, and I thought that I could hear the sound of twigs snapping. Now in my distracted brain, all I could concentrate on was the sound of the twigs. It was driving me crazy. I first thought that there was some sort of deer or chipmunk or something that was prancing around in the woods. I thought that I could go over and maybe scare the animal, and whatever it was would just flee further into the woods and away from me so I could focus. I made my way over to the edge of the tree line and shouted some nonsense noises to try to scare whatever it was. But I heard nothing. I made a sound again and clapped my hands together, and again I heard nothing. I stared intently through the thick trees, and I swear that I saw a silhouette of a person move, but I figured that my mind was playing tricks on me. I kept looking for a little while longer, and I realized that the noise had stopped. I thought to myself that whatever I did must have worked. I sat back down and started to read my textbook again, but now I couldn't concentrate because I couldn't help the feeling that something wasn't right. I flipped through the pages several times, and once I realized that I wasn't retaining anything, I decided to pack my things up and head back. I was fairly far away from where I parked anyway, so I figured it was time to walk back, and I would just find a spot to study that was closer to where I parked. When I walked over to the tree line, I paused instantly. Standing about 30 feet away, shrouded in the trees, was the backside of somebody. It appeared to be a man since the shoulders were so broad, but because the back was facing me, I couldn't be sure. They were dressed in all black, and it looked like they were wearing something on their face. I didn't move or say anything. I just stood there frozen and tried to calm down since I had a million thoughts flying through my head. It felt like an eternity, but in reality it was probably only seconds later, and the person turned abruptly, facing me. And I can't accurately express how much fear I felt in this moment. The mask was horrifying. I would guess that it was homemade, since I had never seen a mask like this in my life. It appeared to be white, but also appeared to have a long snout hanging from the mask. It almost looked like a mask from one of those scenes in Beetlejuice, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, except somehow this was creepier in the moment. As I said, the mask was white, and not. The eyes on the mask were jet black, and wild hair protruded from the mask. I think the hair was attached to the mask and not the person, because it was sort of a mustard yellow color. The person started to hum, and I didn't notice it at first, and I didn't realize that it wasn't some melody. It was a really drawn-out hum, like a sort of groan coming from this person, and they started to step closer to me. I freak out. The clearing that I was on was not big, so in order to walk back to the trail, I would have to walk by this person. I could have slid down the hill, but I probably would have broken my computer and most likely broken my legs, since it was extremely steep and very high up. This person started to run full speed at me, still making that horrible groaning noise. I still can't even believe what happened next. The person ran at me, stops right in front of me. I'm frozen there, and they laugh. And then they just start humming again, but didn't actually lay a single finger on me. Not wanting to know what was happening or taking any chances, I just ran as fast as I could around them. The entire time that I was running, I could hear this person seemingly trying to follow close behind me, still humming, but I didn't bother turning around. I finally made it to my car, and that person was no longer following me. I tried calling the police, but of course my phone service was pretty shoddy out there, and I drove several miles to the closest town. I called the police once I got there and reported what had happened, and I don't think they did anything, since technically the person didn't do anything other than just disturb me, and there were no other complaints. I have no idea what that freak was doing in the woods. I don't know if they were on something, playing some type of prank, or truly messed up enough to actually hurt someone. It seems unlikely that it was a prank, since I didn't see anybody else in the woods, and it seemed like we were the only two humans in the area. I realize I shouldn't complain, since I was unharmed in the incident, but the psychological trauma that I felt, it still sticks with me to this day. I'll never forget that terrible afternoon and the memory of that horrible mask.
So the events of the story still make me think back to that night, and I'm still trying to process what exactly happened. The events that took place on the strange night were about 10 years ago from the moment I'm writing the story. My friends and I were 17 years old and spent most of our weekends with each other, a habit that started back in elementary school, playing video games and sleeping in each other's houses, all through middle school and high school. This was our weekend routine. At one point during senior year, we decided that we wanted to mix things up a little bit by taking the little night drive. It was myself, who had a license and a car at this point, and my two friends, Robbie and Scott. My parents trusted us because, all things considered, we were good kids. The night started out like most nights. Scott and Robbie showed up at the house to sleep over for the night. We ordered some pizza, played some games, and just talked about school for a little bit. Shortly after 11 p.m., we decided to go for a ride. For no other reason than to listen to some music and just exchange some good old-fashioned conversation. We just drove for a while, turning down roads that we didn't even know existed, and before we knew it, we'd been driving for several hours, and I couldn't remember the last time we saw streetlights. It was extremely dark and desolate wherever we ended up driving. Around 1, maybe a little bit later, we were driving down this really eerie and very poorly lit road when we approached a car that was on the side of the road. But it was not just parked on the side of the road. It was kind of somewhat crooked, and the hood was tucked into the shrubs, almost as if though the car had lost control and got into an accident. The red taillights were still giving off a soft glow on the road, and Robbie suggested that we look in case someone fell asleep at the wheel or something bad really happened. If someone had got into an accident, it would have taken hours for paramedics to find them if we didn't do something right now. We slowly and cautiously approached the vehicle. It was an older red Honda Civic. We got out of our car slowly and began approaching this red car. Robbie said in this really brady voice, "Hey, anybody there? You hurt?" And there was no response. And as we got closer, I shouted, "Wait." While we were walking over, I started to make out some type of figures in the back seat just sitting up. And Robbie shouted again, and this time with a bit of urgency in his voice, "Hey, are you okay?" Again, there was no response. No noise at all except for the motor of my car running several feet behind us. After a moment, Robbie finally said whatever and approached the red car, and we followed closely behind him. Even though I felt something was wrong in my gut, we all were shaken with immediate fear as we went up to the window. There was, in fact, a person in the back seat, but almost more hauntingly, it was a mannequin, not a real person. And my first thought was, who in God's name would drive around with essentially a lifelike doll in the back seat? Admittedly, we got a good laugh out of this for a moment, but then the paranoia of this situation came back. Robbie continued to scream if anybody needed help or assistance, but there was still no response. And this is when I noticed that this mannequin had something in its plastic hands. It looked like some sort of tape, a VHS tape. Without thinking, I took the tape, and I didn't even tell my friends until later that night. We decided to just call the police, which we should have done in the first place, and we reported this abandoned car. The police asked for the license plate number, and that's when we noticed that there was no license plate on the car. Whoever ditched this car either didn't have plates or took those plates with them, and all they left behind was that creepy mannequin with that old VHS tape. So we made our statement and told the cops the location of the car and left. Later that night, while we were talking about this incident and just how crazy it was, and that's when I told my friends about that tape that I took from the car. In a sort of shock, and perhaps a bit upset that I didn't mention it before, they of course wanted to watch it right away. On the sticker in front of the tape was this plain white sticker that only just said, "Watch me," written in black marker with very crudely drawn skull and bones. I had some pause, but decided that we had to watch it. Curiosity was getting the best out of all of us at this point, and I found my parents' old VHR in the crawl space and hooked it up to the TV. The tape began with about 5 seconds of a black screen and just the sound of a static tone. Then a man came on the screen with a beard and long hair. The quality of the tape was horrible. He stared into the camera, almost as if though he were staring right at us, and he wore a red flannel and sat at a table next to what appeared to be a workbench of some kind. He stared into the lens for 2 minutes straight without saying a single word. We watched the time, and it was the most unsettling 2 minutes of my entire life. And after those 2 minutes, he laughed, and then sort of morphed that laugh into a cry, all while staring directly into the lens, and finally said in this sort of low, monotone voice, "This tape belongs to me, and I know you have it. I'll find it again, and you'll be sorry." He then followed this with another horrible laugh and cry combo. We then fast-forwarded the tape for several minutes, and nothing else was said other than a few laughs, and just this strange man staring at the camera. And finally, it just cut to black, and it ended. Now, after a bit of conversation about this situation, being stupid kids, we decided not to give the tape to the police. I just kept it, and after all these years, the tape still sits in my bookcase. I'll never watch it again, and I never even really spoke about this event until now writing it down. And I'm sure this is just some kind of stupid joke, but to us kids, this was burned into our brains for years, and I'm still kind of scarred by the mental images that I witnessed that night. Every time I see a man that resembles that man from the tape, even after all these years, I still get that pit of the stomach type feeling, and I'm reminded of that fear and paranoia that I felt in that evening. Why did he have a mannequin in his back seat? Why did he crash his car? And why did he have a tape there?
I was 14 years old, and my mom and I had been living in a 3-bedroom double-wide trailer ever since we left my dad. My mom worked a full-time job, which meant that from Monday to Friday, I would have the house for myself for about 2 hours after getting home from school and before she got home from work. I usually would spend my time on my computer or working on writing my D&D campaign. And in no time at all, my mom would be home. At least, that was when I felt comfortable in my house. That all changed though. One day when I found myself walking in on a burglary in progress. I had just gotten home from school, and when I walked into my house, everything seemed normal. I walked inside and locked the door behind me before taking my shoes off. And as I was in the process of taking off my shoes, I could have sworn I heard something come from the room we used to store our moving boxes in the back of the trailer. At first, I assumed it was just a box or the house settling, and I didn't pay the noise any mind. But before I could even stand up from taking my shoes off, I heard it again. This time it worried me a bit, so I decided to call out to see if my mom had come home early. But when I yelled out, there was no response. Still, something felt a bit odd to me, so I decided to check the room out real quick before getting comfortable. I poked my head through the door and looked around. But from what I could tell, nothing had changed, which reassured me that I had in fact heard the house settling. After that, I went about my normal routine. I stepped into my room and put my backpack on my bed before walking back out of the kitchen for a quick snack. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out a fruit roll-up, but before I could open it, I heard another sound coming from the back room. Only this time, it was followed by something that shook me to my core. After the sound of something thumping on the ground in the room, I heard what was undoubtedly a man let out a single cough. I dropped my snack and instinctively began running through the house and toward my bedroom. I'm not sure why I chose my room instead of the front door. Maybe it was where I felt the safest, but either way, I sprinted into my bedroom, which was 2 doors down from the back room. And without hesitating, I did the only thing I could think of, just like I had seen in movies. I grabbed my wooden desk chair and propped it up against my bedroom door. It was perfect timing too, because as soon as the door was wedged shut, whoever was in my house began banging up against my bedroom door. I felt back in fear and began looking around to think of what I could do next. And that was when I came to my senses. I looked over to my window and saw my escape. I was able to open it up and push the screen out before climbing through it. And since we lived in a trailer, the window were only about 5 feet off the ground. Once I was out of the house, I quickly ran through my yard and over to my neighbor's house. It only took him a few seconds before he answered the door after I began pounding on it and screaming for help. My neighbor opened the door and I explained to him what was happening. He didn't question it at all. And as soon as he saw the panic in my face, he led me into his house and we both waited there for the police and my mom to arrive home. The police showed up about 30 minutes before my mom did, but it was still too late to catch the intruder. By the time they showed up, he had already left the house. Not before destroying it though. All 3 of the rooms appeared to be ransacked and my mother's jewelry collection was missing. For a while, I ended up staying at my neighbor's house or a friend's house after school while I waited for my mom to get home. I just wasn't comfortable being alone in my house anymore.